What is up, guys? Handyman Sam here, and today I'm going to be accessing a timing belt on a 2000 Toyota Solara. This car here actually broke down on the side of the road and I had to repair it there, and really didn't have time to video or anything. But one thing I didn't get to do whenever I put on the timing belt was put on a new gasket or make a gasket, because I don't think they actually make a gasket for the cover of the timing belt. So that's what we're going to be working on today, and I'll show you a few of the tools and stuff you'll need, and I'll just kind of walk you through the process. So you may need something to lay on, so I'll grab something like that, and then maybe something to put the jack on. You'll need a good arrangement of sockets and wrenches, probably an impact gun, not a camera mount because that's just for me, unless you want to make videos too. Gloves probably, rubber gloves, and a gasket maker, a jack stand, and a tire iron. And I just remembered the timing belt is actually on the passenger side of the car, so you'll want to have it to where you can jack up the passenger side. So now I have the car turned around to where I can be sort of in the grass where it's comfortable, and then jack up the car. So yeah, that's what we'll do first. We'll jack up the car, take off the tire, and then we'll start to get to access the timing belt. So on the passenger side, this is about where you want to jack up the vehicle at. This is the jacking point. And so we'll just slide our jack underneath and then start to jack it up. And before you jack it up all the way, you want to go ahead and loosen these lug nuts here just a little bit so that it's not stuck, you know, whenever it's jacked up, and so it's not turning the tire. So you'll want to use your tire iron with the 13/16 fitting. So we have all the lug nuts broke loose. So now we'll jack up the car, and then immediately once it gets high enough, we'll put a jack stand underneath. So slide this guy underneath there. So now most of the weight is on the jack stand. This is still pressed up against the underside of the vehicle, so it's kind of like a safety measure, but the jack stand supporting most of the weight. So now we can take the tire off. Alright, that was the last lug nut, so we'll just move this tire out of the way. So this gives us access to this plate here, this plastic plate, which the harmonic balancer is behind that, and then the timing belt cover is also behind that. There are a few things we'll have to do up top, like underneath the hood, before we can get too much further on here, but I'll go ahead and take off this plate. And this plate is held on by two 10mm bolts, hex bolts. Now I can just grab the bottom of the plate like this, it falls right out, and that right there is your harmonic balancer. But as you can see, there are some serpentine belts holding onto it, and right behind that is the plate. This is the plate here, which covers up the timing belt. First we'll go up top, open the hood, and take off an engine stabilizer bracket. We'll just open up the hood. This is the stabilizer bracket I was talking about. The engine's still very hot. I may give it a few minutes to cool off. You may want to take a few of these out of the way, these connections. It's actually just two connections. It's these here and these up here. By the way, take off the negative connection on the battery so that whenever you take off these electrical connections, it won't mess up anything. So we will first start off taking off this 14mm bolt, followed by this 14mm bolt. And that should give us the ability to pull this part of the bracket off. And they're on pretty tight, so you might need to use some kind of extension like this. We'll take this bolt out along with the washer. Yep, the engine's still nice and toasty. Alright, so that gives us this bolt and along with the washer. Got about one more bolt behind here. There's this one, it's the same size, it's 14mm. So now we can just pull this stabilizer right out. Then that gives us access to this sort of Y-shaped bracket. There are two bolts at the bottom. I believe they are 14mm. And then there's one up here. The top one. The engine's still pretty hot. It's going to need some more time to cool down, so I'm going to kind of skip that part for now and move on to taking off the serpentine belt. So let me show you that real quick. So what you'll do to take off this top serpentine belt is loosen this nut first. It's like an adjuster thing, and then you'll be able to like move the alternator down by twisting this bolt here. So we'll just pop on the socket, loosen it just a little bit. We'll also need to loosen this bolt here. That's really holding the alternator like rigid in place. So that'll keep us from being able to do this just yet. So we'll need to loosen that some first, and then we can push the alternator down. So now the alternator can move freely, but we'll need to loosen this bolt. And it's plenty loose now, so we can get the serpentine belt off. So that's one serpentine belt off. So this next serpentine belt adjuster bolt is a bit harder to get to. It's that right next to that golden ring, or right on top of that golden ring. And what we'll do is we'll loosen it just a little bit. We won't take it all the way out. Then we'll pull down on this serpentine belt here. So we'll just get our socket and ratchet in here, probably an extension on there. Twist it. It's on there pretty good, so be patient with it. But we'll eventually get it. There we go. Alright, so loosen it just a little like that, then pull down on this. And you can see in the back there it moved. And see, that's plenty of slack to get off now. Just pull it on out with the harmonic balancer. There we go. So guys, we're closer than you think now. All we have to do is just take off the bracket that I was showing earlier, like that sort of V-shaped bracket. And then after that, it's really just taking off the harmonic balancer with the impact. I tried leverage before and it did not work for me, so just think about that whenever you try to do this job. So now that the engine's cooled down a little bit, we can take off the bolts that hold off the bracket. There's one there, if it'll focus. So that's one bolt that's holding on, and then there's one on the other side of the bracket, sort of back this way. That right there is actually the bolt we're going after. It's kind of tight back there, but it's doable. So I already loosened it with the ratchet, so I'm just pulling it out now, the front bolt. So to give you a better view, this is about where the ratchet will land, the ratchet and socket. So that's about where it's at. Sort of just right behind there. So what we'll do is we'll attach like an extension onto the back of this ratchet and just loosen her up. So now we can really just loosen it with our hands, because you know this whole bracket here is loose. The best way to do this is to just reach down underneath the alternator pulley, and then you can just reach right around to the other side and start to loosen it. Alright, now out comes the whole bracket, like that. Next, I'm probably going to take off this top plate. There's actually two pieces to this cover. There's the top part, and then there's the bottom part that the harmonic balancer is kind of in the way of. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the top, then I'll move on to removing the harmonic balancer and then the bottom plate. Now going around the outer circumference of the whole cover are these little bolts. They're 10 millimeter hex bolts, and so you'll want to keep up with where they go because some bolts are longer than others. So I'm going to start loosening these, just a 10 millimeter. There's another one down there, and like I said, it just kind of goes around, and you'll just kind of have to feel for yourself kind of where the bolts are, because there should be diagrams of where the bolts are. If there are, I'll try to post it like right now on the video. Alright, so we have all the bolts out of the top plate, so we can just pull this up and out. And we can see where the different bolts were. There are actually only 4 bolts, even though there are a few more holes. See, this is just for a little plastic peg to go through. But these little metal rings are where the bolts went through. And this is our timing belt here. So if you're wanting to know how to get to the timing belt, this is where it's at right here. It's kind of run along there. There's the water pump gear down there, and this is your tensioner here, and this is of course your camshaft gear, and then down at the very bottom where the harmonic balancer is, that's going to be your crankshaft gear. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to get the timing belt off. We still have to take off the harmonic balancer and then the bottom plate, but then it's right there, so it's not that much further away. So now we'll grab our impact gun and a 19mm, it can be either deep well or just regular impact socket. It can't be a regular socket because that will crack most likely. I've tried that before, it doesn't work. So now we'll just put on our impact, make sure it's positioned to turn to the left. Just get this sucker off. That easy. Now I've seen in other videos, some people have just been able to wiggle it and get it off, but I've needed a puller, or I did last time. So if you want to just go to AutoZone or some kind of auto parts store, they'll give you a puller for a harmonic balancer, and then you can get this off. So this is basically the kit I'm talking about. We'll use these smaller bolts for ours. You can obviously see the little holes we'll be putting the bolts in, and then basically just be pulling it out by driving this into the center, and then that'll pull the whole harmonic balancer off. So this is about how it should look set up. See there, we have the driver going right in the center, and then 2 bolts tightened as much as they can be, going through those center holes. So yeah, you'll just turn this clockwise, like tightening it, and that'll pull this whole thing off. So I ended up having to use the smaller bolts or shorter bolts, but you can see now it's pretty well loose. There it goes. So that leaves you with the spindle of the crankshaft. So now we can take off these smaller bolts through here. They just go around. There's another one there, like the other one, and so we'll start on that. They're the same. They're 10mm hex bolts. There we go. Bottom plate can come out. And you can probably push it down to the bottom. Yeah, there we go. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not going to be taking this off, and because I might risk making it out of time, because it took me a little while to get back in time. But if you are trying to put on a timing belt and putting in time, there should be like a kit, like if you do get a kit, and there's sort of like an instruction sheet thing, and this here already have like marks and stuff, like of how it should be in time. And obviously it's not going to be on there all the time because the engine rotates, but then at the bottom there's another, I don't know if you can see it really well, but this is on the crankshaft gear. Right there between those two teeth there's like a little divot, and then up here there's a little lump there behind the gear tooth. That's what you need to line that up with if you're trying to time it for the crankshaft gear. This is on the instructions that I got with the timing belt. But see, that's the little divot I was talking about in between the gear teeth, and then there's like a little lump thing. So that's for the crankshaft, and then for the camshaft, it's a little different. But you'll want to make sure that that little S with the hole is lined up, and it should. Whenever I was doing it, it kind of clicked into place like a magnetic pull, so it might not be too hard. You can see there the S and then the hole, and so but yeah, just keep that in mind whenever you're putting on a new timing belt. Make sure that this is tight up here, and whenever you release the tension on there, all you have to do to release the tension of this is to loosen this bolt, push down the tensioner, and then tighten it back up, and then you'll be able to take the whole belt off. But we can see on this bottom piece of the cover that there are 5 bolts that go in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is one there, but something went wrong with mine whenever I was taking it off. And yes, I had the bolt off, but it just decided to fall apart. So guys, I got most of the old gasket off. So now I'm just going to kind of run where the old gasket used to be and kind of do like a thin bead, and then immediately bolt it on so that it doesn't dry out. Should look something like this once you're done with it. It's sort of just a continuous bead. Alright, so we now have the bottom part of the cover on. Okay, so what you're going to want to do now is just kind of line up the harmonic balancer, line up with that key there, with this little slot. Feel around until we find it. There it is. Wiggle it on just a little bit. Hit a few licks with a hammer. I'd suggest using a rubber mallet, but the only thing I have is this. We can put on our bolt, thread it on a few notches, and take the impact, set it to tighten. And then right about there, whenever it starts to stop, then let it go. If I had to guess, I believe that bolt is tightened out at 80 foot-pounds. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's that. I went ahead and put the top piece of the timing belt cover on there, and so it's got silicone and everything. So next, I will go ahead and probably put the Serpentine belt on down there while we have access to it. So next, we'll take our small Serpentine belt, put it behind the harmonic balancer, and then feed it up to the pulley up above. That bolt that we loosened earlier, what we'll do is we'll push with our fingers down on this little bracket here, and that will help tighten the Serpentine belt. So I pulled it as much as I could by hand, so next we might want to get like a screwdriver right where my thumb's at in that gap and kind of pry it where this is a bit tighter. A 12mm socket to tighten that down, and the belt is good and tight. So next I'm just going to put this bracket back on, and it's going to have 2 bolts on the bottom and then 1 bolt on the top. I got the 2 bottom bolts in hand tight, and so then now I'm going to put in the bolt that goes right here. They're all 14mm. I will tighten those to approximately 30 foot-pounds. This one as well. Okay, so the bracket is pretty secure. So now we're going to move on to putting this other Serpentine belt on. We're going to be using a 12mm socket. Alright, so the belt is about the tightness we want. So we'll just tighten this bolt down. Now we can put on the engine stabilizer. Just kind of slip it back in there. Try to line up the holes fairly close. Put in this bolt in the washer. Other bolts. So we'll just finish up tightening these with a ratchet. 14mm socket. An extension for these 2. Also tighten up this pivot bolt for the alternator so that it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it still won't, but it's just so that it's more secure. Plug back in our electrical connections. So then we'll take our little guard here, shield, whatever you want to call it, pop that behind there, and we can tighten up the 10mm bolts. And that takes care of everything except putting the battery cable back on the battery and putting on the tires. So that's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, it's sort of a long process, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it gets easier. So thank you once again, guys, for watching. I appreciate all the subscribers and what all you guys do, you know, view the videos and everything. And I love to help people out, so it kind of is a win-win situation. But anyway, I guess we will see you guys in the next video.